Hi, and welcome to this NPTEL course titled Drama and Literature. Today will be the final session, the last session on Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22. It should be on the screen, chapter 40, which is called Catch-22. And it talks about the phrase in very flippant details, but also quite politically as well. And in the previous session, we saw how Catch-22 becomes a free-floating signifier for all kinds of law and lawlessness. And again, the difference between legality and illegality blurs away in this novel, as do many, many borderlines, like life and death, friendship and enmity, hostility and intimacy. So all these notional binaries blur away quite dramatically, and sometimes in very tragic comic ways. There's a pseudo-comical quality about this blurring of borderlines. So if you remember, the first time we come by the phrase Catch-22 is about where Wolserain was assigned the job of censoring letters, right? Letters that people sent or soldiers sent back to their homes, and striking off confidential details. That was supposedly the job, but then we also saw how he just made a mockery of it by writing little flippant details, taking off adjectives, taking off verbs, taking off letters, taking off articles, etc. And then, of course, inserting new names. So Catch-22, even at that point of time, at the beginning, the very first chapter, we saw how that became an exercise in purposelessness. That became an exercise in, complete darkness. I mean, no one has any meaning about it. So it becomes an activity in absurdity. But that activity in absurdity also takes up more sinister associations, more negative, destructive, nihilistic associations, as was the case in the previous session when we read the chapter called The Eternal City, right? So it was talking about Rome, the heavily bombed and destroyed Rome, and this place for fallen woman. And Wolserain goes there, and if you remember the section, the old woman talks about how a group of strange men had come and chased them away without arresting them, and they had not shown them any legal paper because the law, protected them from expressing their legality, right? So Catch-22 becomes this self-circulating unit, right, of self-interest and meaninglessness, and the whole circuit through which meaninglessness can be produced and preserved and perpetuated, right? It becomes an exercise, a metaphor, a real activity as well. And again, what that does at a very novelistic level is to blur the borders between matter and metaphor. Because Catch-22 is matter, it is some law, written somewhere, but at the same time, it's a law which protects itself from being expressed and exposed and being displayed. But it's also a metaphor for uncertainty. It also is a metaphor for unknowability. You don't get to know what Catch-22 is, and that is precisely the point. And that makes it quite dark and sinister in quality as well. Okay, so with that, we come to the chapter, which will be the final chapter for our study in this novel. But I do recommend that read the whole novel. It's a fantastic novel. It's, like I mentioned at some point at the beginning, it has transcended from being a work of fiction to be a cultural metaphor. A metaphor of uncertainty, a metaphor for double bind, a metaphor for, the flip side and the front side merging together. So it has become a metaphorical presence in the cultural imaginary, Catch-22. So it's one of the most impactful novels ever written, especially in 20th century postmodernist fiction. Okay, so we come to this point where Colonel Corn and Colonel Cathcart are agitated with Wolserain, and again we see how the production of paradoxes work over here. And this is a section which should be on your screen, where Colonel Corn motioned Colonel Cathcart to be silent and smiled at Wolserain. You really have been making things terribly difficult for Colonel Cathcart, he observed with flip good humor. As a fact, did not displease him at all, right? So again, the quality, the difference between humor and agitation seems to have disappeared. The men are unhappy and the morale is beginning to deteriorate, and it's all your fault. And that is the reason the morale is deteriorating, the men are unhappy, and that is ascribed to Wolserain. it's your fault, Wasserian argued, for raising a number of missions. Right? You're just sending them for more missions, and that's making them exhausted, and hence, they're being unhappy because of that. And now comes the paradoxical point where Khan retorts, and again, this is on your screen. No, it's your fault for refusing to fly them. Colonel Khan retorted. The men were perfectly content to fly as many missions as we asked, as long as they thought they had no alternative. Now you've given them hope, and they're unhappy. So the blame is all yours, right? So again, we see a situation where hopefulness produces melancholia. Hopefulness produces discontent, right? At a very notional, experiential level. This is what has been said. Before they had no hope, so they were just content in terms of carrying out all orders which were given to them. They were just executing orders, following orders. Now you came in, and now you seem to have given them some sense of agency, some sense of decisive quality. They can decide, and they have been hopeful because of they're aware of the rights, etc. And now they're unhappy, right? So again, this becomes quite political, as you can understand. So the blame is all yours. Doesn't he know that there's a war going on? Colonel Cathcart, still stamping back and forth, demanded morosely without looking at Wasserian. I'm quite sure he does, Colonel Khan answered. That's probably the reason, that's probably why he refuses to fly them, right? So again, because there's a war going on, they should not fly. And that again undercuts the notional understanding of flying and bombing and war. Wasserian's defense here would be that because the war going on, we want to save as many human lives as possible in terms of not letting them fly, right? And it is precisely because there's a war going on we should not let them fly. So again, that undercuts the heroic sentiment of the war. And as we have discussed earlier, this is a very, very anti-heroic novel. It completely deconstructs the notional idea of military heroism or military masculine heroism. It becomes almost a parody of that in a certain sense. It's definitely a travesty of the entire heroic march of the military masculinity and the glory of war, the glory of triumph, the glory of victory, and all of that. And there is no victory. It's quite evident in the novel. It's almost like a black hole where everyone gets sucked into, and everyone dies at different levels during the war. And the laughter that is produced in the novel is the empty laughter, which is post-death, right? It's an empty laughter which is post-exhaustion, and that makes the laughter quite hollow in quality, quite cynical in quality, but also quite subversive in quality, right? So that is the politics of laughter in this novel. Okay, so does it make any difference to him? Will the knowledge that there's a war going on weaken your decision to refuse to participate in it? Colonel Khan inquired with sarcastic seriousness. Again, look at the juxtaposition, sarcastic seriousness, mocking Colonel Cathcart. No, sir, Wasserian replied, almost returning Colonel Khan's smile. I was afraid of that, Colonel Khan remarked with an elaborate sigh, locking his fingers together comfortably on top of a smooth, bald, broad, shiny brown head. Again, look at these series of adjectives which are used to sort of identify this one organ, the head, and so many adjectives were just used for that purpose. In all fairness, we really haven't treated you too badly, have we? We have fed you and paid you on time. We gave you a medal and even made you a captain. I never should have made him a captain, Colonel Cathcart exclaimed bitterly. I should have given him a court-martial after he loused up the Ferrara mission and went round twice. I told you not to promote him, said Colonel Khan, but you wouldn't listen to me. No, you didn't. You told me to promote him, didn't you? I told you not to promote him, but you just wouldn't listen. I should have listened. You never listened to me, Colonel Khan persisted with relish. That's the reason we are in the spot, right? All right, gee whiz, stop rubbing it in, will you? Now, you see this conversation over here, this sort of one-line exchange that we can see happening. It has some kind of a Samuel Beckett-like quality, right? There's just two people talking to each other in a setting which doesn't really have any meaning. It's a purposeless setting. It's a massive spectacle of purposelessness, and they try to dig up some rationale. They try to resurrect some rationale by looking at small, fragile, narratives where who told what to whom, and the person should have listened to. So they're trying to retroactively resurrect some kind of rationale for that, which is obviously a futile mission. There's a Sisyphean quality, and I'm alluding to the myth of Sisyphus, where someone is doomed to push a stone up the hill, and then the moment it reaches the top of the hill, the stone rolls down, and the person will have to push it up again all the time, and that just goes on ad infinitum, right? So that Sisyphean purposeless quality is very much there in this novel. Okay, and then we are told that they are thinking of sending him home. We're going to send him home, I'm afraid. Colonel Con was chuckling triumphantly when he turned away from Colonel Cathcart to face Wasserine. Wasserine, the war is over for you. We're going to send you home. You really don't deserve it, you know, which is one of the reasons why I don't mind doing it. Since there is nothing else we can risk doing to you at this time, we've decided to return you to the States. We have worked out this little deal to... What kind of deal? Wasserine demanded with defiant mistrust. Colonel Con tossed his head back and laughed. Oh, a thoroughly despicable deal. Make no mistake about that. It's absolutely revolting, but you'll accept it quickly enough. Don't be too sure. So, and the deal has been described in very cynical details, and then we also told that Wasserine will accept it, and then, you know, we get to know what the sentiment is without knowing the deal. So again, what the deal would produce as an effect, that becomes more important than the content of the deal. I haven't the slightest doubt you will, even though it stings to high heaven. Oh, by the way, you haven't told any of the men you refuse to fly more missions, have you? No, sir, Wasserine answered promptly. Colonel Con nodded approvingly. That's good. I like the way you lie. You'll go far in this world if you ever acquire some decent ambition. Right? So lying, as we have seen since the beginning of the novel, lying becomes a performance in a novel, not just at a verbal rhetorical level, but also at a very physical, corporeal level. Someone's pretending to be sick, someone's pretending to be diseased. So, you know, lying becomes a performative, almost spectacular, collective activity. Okay, you'll go far in this world if you ever acquire some decent ambition. Doesn't it know there's a war going on? Colonel Cathcart yelled out suddenly and blew with vigorous disbelief into the open end of a cigarette holder. Right, so he just goes on about the war, and then we come to this interesting bit about patriotism, where you know, Wasserine's patriotism has been questioned. Hasn't he got any patriotism? Won't you fight for your country? Colonel Con demanded, emulating Colonel Cathcart's harsh, self-righteous tone. Want to give up your life for Colonel Cathcart and me? Right, so. As you can see, even the narrative of patriotism is being described in the Second World War American setting as some kind of a flippant, dwindled activity. First of all, they say, "Want you fight for your country," which is the United States of America, right? So America is a country over here. And then in the very next sentence, they say, "Want you give up your life for Colonel Cathcart and me?" So again, it dwindles into some kind of a private loyalty, right? So from a collective loyalty to the country of the United States of America, it just comes down to these two colonels, right? And which, again, in a way, it deconstructs the myth of patriotism around the time of a war, because, you know, this is Second World War, and the kind of patriotism whipped up for that, you know, every American soldier must die for America, etc. But then what this also reveals is the fact that at a certain level with these two colonels, it's all about men dying for them. It's a personal thing, it's a personal ownership, right? So that obviously undercuts the myth or the fantasy of patriotic belief and patriotic commitment. Okay, Wasserine tensed with alert astonishment when he heard Colonel Con's concluding words. "What's that?" he exclaimed. "What have you and Colonel Cart got to do with my country? You're not the same. So how do you blend yourself with the country? You're like just two military officers. You're not the country. The country is a different entity, a different construct. How can you separate us?" Colonel Con inquired with ironical tranquility. "That's right," Colonel Cathcart cried emphatically. "You're either for us or against us. There's no two ways about it." So, you know, this very dualistic understanding, either you're fighting a battle for us or you're going against us. "I'm afraid it's caught you," answered Colonel Con. "You're either for us or against the country. It's as simple as that." "Oh no, Colonel, I don't buy that." Colonel Con was unroughed. Neither do I, frankly, but everyone else will. So there you are. Right. So again, this very clearly mocks the grandeur of patriotism, the grandeur of military masculinity, and in a certain sense as well, this novel becomes, a mockery of some of the tenets of heroism, war, especially American heroism, American heroic masculinity around the time of the war. So the cynicism shows quite clearly. The soldiers, the army officers say, we don't buy that either, but everyone else does, and that's how it operates. Everyone just consumes this, this belief system, right? So everyone else will. So there you are. So you have to subscribe to it because everyone else subscribes to it, but we don't subscribe to it because we know better. Right, you are disgraced to a uniform, Colonel Cuthbert declared with blustering wrath, whirling to confront Worthrain for the first time. I'd like to know how you ever got to be a captain anyway. You promoted him, Colonel Con reminded sweetly, stifling a snicker. Don't you remember? Well, I never should have done it. I told you not to do it, Colonel Con said, but it just won't listen to me. And then you can see there's a recursive quality to the dialogues over here, right? And it just repeats in cycles. There's no linear movement, and the cyclicity of dialogues, the cyclicity of statements, obviously, is reflective of the purposelessness and the directionlessness of the entire narrative. There's no future. There's no direction to go ahead. There's no point to go ahead. So all that these people can do is talk in cycles, talk in circles, in roundabout ways. So just keep going back to the same points because there is no linearity, there's no sequentiality, and that's that's something which is reflective of the general absurd condition of this novel, right? So that's something which we see. Okay, so we will just wind up now. At the end of chapter 40, as you can see, Worthrain is on his way out. Worthrain waved goodbye fondly to his new pals and sauntered out into the balcony corridor, almost bursting into song the instant he was alone. He was home free. He had pulled it off. Again, the performative quality is interesting. He had pulled it off. His act of rebellion had succeeded. He was safe, and he had nothing to be ashamed of to anyone. He started towards the staircase with a jaunty and exhilarated air. A private in green fatigues saluted him. Worthrain returned the salute happily, staring at the private with curiosity. He looked strangely familiar. When Worthrain returned the salute, the private in green fatigues turned suddenly into Nately's hall and lunged at him murderously with a bone-handled kitchen knife that caught him in the side below his upraised arm. Worthrain sank to the floor with a shriek, shutting his eyes in overwhelming terror as he saw the girl lift the knife to strike at him again. He was already unconscious when Colonel Con and Colonel Cathcart dashed out of the office and saved his life by frightening her away. Right. So, as you can see, what we get a glimpse of in the end is how the real danger in this war is not something which happens in the battlefield. It can happen anywhere. So every field is a battlefield, and every site can be a site of violence. And the person attacking him away, it just is a disguised person, and then it just appears in a uniform and then attacks him. And it turns out to be a woman, and it turns out to be someone who's stabbing him. And then the two colonels come and rescue him away. He's almost unconscious, but she is taken away, right? Now, this being the conclusion, and there is obviously, if you read the entire novel, there's a similar open-ended conclusion as well. But what I want to stress a little bit, and this is how I wish to end this session and the novel, is to look at the way in which violence and freedom, they sort of merge into each other, right? And we have this moment of freedom where he's about to be exhilarated, about to be ecstatic about the fact that he's free to go, etc. And then suddenly he's attacked. So the abruptness of violence, the abruptness of the sudden attack, that is a norm. That is the normal condition in a way, which is quite perilous as well. But there seems to be some kind of a flippant, distributive quality about violence, right? So it's not just about the usual violence of a soldier dying in a battlefield, a soldier dying while on duty to save his battalion or his country, it doesn't work in that grandeur narrative. What operates over here is a quick stab of the knife in the military space and almost a civilian space, and it's got nothing to do with the battle, it's got nothing to do with the war, but the psychological impact of the situation is that it seems to reflect to us as readers that the war is in the head, the war is in intimate spaces, the war is everywhere. It's not just some battlefield out there where people are dying, right? It's just everywhere in the novel. It's a war with knowledge, it's a war with trust, it's a war with intimacy, it's a war with love. Every sentiment is being warred with, right? And the borders between violence and safety, the borders between liberty and attack just gone, disappeared, right? And that seems to be the cynical core of this novel, if you can call that a core in the first place, because there is a godless quality, and we've talked about that in several sessions, the godlessness of this novel, and how the godlessness is reflective of the centerlessness. If there's any center at all, it's a very cynical, hollow center, right? And there's several metaphysical, existential discussions about God and godlessness, etc. But the important point that the novel tries to promote and describe is that in a situation of war, there is no certainty, there is no friendship, there is no enmity. It's just one entangled act of violence which can operate and emerge anywhere. So there's this emergent quality of violence, and there's also this connected quality of violence. Everything is connected in a very violent way. So all the vectors are violent vectors, right? And that is a very, very dark quality that a novel is trying to describe, and the comicality emerges from that darkness. And that's the reason why the laughter in the novel is a very, very hollow laughter. It's a very almost sinister, cynical laughter, right? So it's sort of sinister in a cynical way, and that seems to be the sentiment in the novel, which describes the godlessness in very, very dark terms. So with that, we conclude Catch-22, and as I mentioned, this novel has become, just went on to become a cultural statement, a cultural metaphor of uncertainty and double possibilities which can contradict each other. And the success of the novel as a cultural document, as a cultural text, is just astounding. Right? It's absolutely marvelous and astounding how this novel transcended from a work of fiction into a cultural metaphor. Right? And the metaphor emerged from a real situation which is described over here, and that again it goes on to show literature's ability to transcend metaphoricity and just become something which is not just fictional but also quite real, in a sense how it enters the cultural exchange of not just that time but also in subsequent times. And trauma in the novel, as we have mentioned, is described in very, very complex terms. Trauma is not really always tragic. There's this comical quality about trauma as well, and the tragic comicality of trauma makes it a very complicated and complex cognitive category, which is described and focalized and embodied by so many characters and so many situations in a novel. So we stop at this point today. I hope you enjoyed the session with Catch-22. It's one of the most important novels written about the war around that time, and it's just gone on to become a cultural document as well. So I strongly advise to read the whole novel, because we have, for the purpose of this course, the practical purposes, we have read certain selected passages, but I strongly advise to read the whole novel from point A to point Z, and find out how it really contributes as a work of fiction to our understanding of war and war trauma and the violence that emerges out of it. So with that, we conclude Joseph Heller's Catch-22. I hope you enjoyed the session, and we'll move on to our next text, a new text in a subsequent session. Thank you for your attention.